She arrived at his farm with nothing but a recipe book, and changed everything. Welcome to Between Lives, a place for stories about ordinary people whose quiet choices change more than anyone expects. Mrs. Eleanor's bakery always smelled of toasted flour, even after the ovens had gone cold. For 5 years, Hannah Moore had known the world through that narrow shop in Maple Hollow, Vermont. She knew it from behind the worn counter, from the heavy wooden table where she kneaded dough before sunrise, and from the tiny room in the back where she slept beneath a thin quilt. Under her bed sat a small wooden box that held nearly everything she owned. It was not much. Hannah had never had much. But she had a roof over her head, honest work, and a key she could hide in the pocket of her apron. For a young woman with no close family and nowhere else to go, that had once felt like enough. Mrs. Eleanor died on a grey morning before dawn. She went quietly, almost as if she were afraid that even her death might inconvenience someone. She had been ill for several weeks. Hannah had cared for her between batches of bread, bringing broth to her bed, changing the water basin, and keeping the ovens burning because bills did not stop arriving simply because someone was sick. When they buried Mrs. Eleanor, the bakery remained closed for 2 days. On the 3rd day, her nephew arrived. He was a well-groomed man with clean hands, polished shoes, and the quick, measuring eyes of someone who could place a price on a room before remembering the lives that had unfolded inside it. He came with a notary, opened drawers, counted coins, lifted tablecloths, and inspected the walls. Hannah stood near the oven with her sleeves rolled up and flour still clinging to her hands. "The building has been sold," he said without sitting down. "Sold?" "There was already an interested buyer. The papers will be signed tomorrow." Hannah looked at the kneading table, then at the curtain that separated the shop from her little room. She did not ask why it had happened so quickly. People who made decisions like that rarely waited for everyone else to finish saying goodbye. "I can keep working," she said quietly. "I know every customer, every order, and every account. I can run the ovens by myself." The nephew was not cruel. Somehow, that made it worse. He spoke with the calm voice of a man who believed reason excused everything. "The new owner is bringing his own staff." Hannah lowered her eyes to her hands. A pale burn scar crossed one wrist, one of many marks the ovens had left on her over the years. She had worked in that bakery as though caring for it meant caring for some small part of herself. Now she understood that a place could release you without trembling. The nephew placed a few bills and coins on the table. "That is your pay for the final week." Hannah did not touch the money right away. "I live here too." He glanced toward the room behind the flour sacks, as if he had only just remembered that someone's life existed there. "You may stay tonight. Tomorrow, the building must be empty." There were no shouts and no pleading. Hannah had learned long ago that people without powerful names could cry until they had no tears left and still hear the door close. She nodded once. "I understand." The nephew looked relieved. Perhaps he had expected a scene. Perhaps he was grateful that the poor young woman had accepted her place without making him uncomfortable. After he left, Hannah stood alone in the bakery. The silence felt different from ordinary silence. On other evenings, even after the ovens had cooled, there had been the soft crackle of wood, Mrs. Eleanor's cough from the back room, or a neighbor knocking late because someone had forgotten a loaf. That night there was only rain tapping against the window and flour dust hanging in the grey light. Hannah packed slowly. One change of clothes, a comb, a faded blue scarf, 2 sewing needles, a bar of soap wrapped in cloth, her final pay, and 3 loaves from the day before that no one would collect. Before closing her wooden box, she opened the drawer where Mrs. Eleanor had kept her recipes. Inside lay a brown notebook, stained with butter, its corners bent and its pages filled with the old woman's narrow handwriting. Honey bread for cold mornings. Apple cake for the autumn sale. Orange peel cookies when there is never enough sugar. Hannah ran her fingers over the first page. The notebook was not hers, but Mrs. Eleanor had promised it to her one feverish night. "If this place ever comes to an end," the old woman had whispered, "take the book. A recipe is another way of refusing to be left with nothing." Hannah placed it between her clothes. At dusk she wiped the kneading table one final time, folded her apron, and left it over the back of a chair. Then she sat on the edge of her narrow bed without removing her shoes. She did not cry yet. She only looked at the walls. She had lived so long in someone else's building that she had nearly forgotten it was not hers. The bed, the key, the oven, even the smell of bread at dawn had seemed to belong to her because she had cared for them. But caring for a place was not always enough to make the world admit that you belong there. The next morning, before the new owner arrived, Hannah left with a canvas bag over her shoulder. A fine rain still fell. At the doorway, she paused beneath the faded sign, looked through the fogged glass, and pressed the bag against her side. Then she walked away. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she could not stay. Sometimes, when life pushes a person forward like that, walking is not courage. It is simply the only way not to collapse in the road. By noon, the road out of Maple Hollow had turned to mud. Hannah walked past vegetable plots, low fences, and scattered farmhouses before the path began climbing into the hills. Twice she asked whether anyone needed a housekeeper or kitchen helper. At the first house, a man told her there was no work. At the second, a woman looked her up and down and said they already had too many mouths to feed. It was not exactly an insult, but Hannah felt it like one. By evening, her boots were heavy with water. The bread in her bag had softened, and the sky had darkened to a deep iron grey. Wind carried the smell of wet leaves and cold earth. Then she saw a light. It was faint, little more than a yellow glow behind a row of trees on the other side of a stone road. Hannah stopped in the rain and made out a fence, the roof of a farmhouse, several wooden boxes raised on stands, and a small stable beyond them. At first she did not understand what the boxes were. Then she heard the humming. Even in the cold, even beneath the rain, something there was alive. The sound was low and steady, as though the ground itself were breathing. Hannah approached the gate. Inside, a man was covering the wooden hives with slow, practiced movements. He wore a dark work shirt, a wool vest, and a hat darkened by rain around the brim. He did not seem old, but there was a tired stillness in his shoulders, as if he had decided long ago to spend words carefully. He noticed her before she spoke. They looked at each other through the rain. "Good evening," Hannah said. He did not answer immediately. His gaze moved from the bag on her shoulder to her muddy boots and then to her pale face. There was no cruelty in his eyes, but no trust either. "Evening." Hannah swallowed. All day, she had imagined a dozen ways to ask for help. Standing before him, everyone sounded too pitiful or too long. So she chose the truth. "I need somewhere dry for one night. I can work for it. I'll leave in the morning." The man set his tool on top of a hive and approached the gate without opening it. "Are you from Maple Hollow?" "Yes." "Do you have family?" Hannah tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. "Not nearby. Not the kind that can take me in." He studied her face, perhaps searching for the part of the story she had not told. Hannah held his gaze. It was difficult, but she refused to look either defiant or desperate. "I worked at Mrs. Eleanor's bakery," she added. "The building was sold. I lost the job and the room where I lived." The man remained silent. Then a loud bray erupted from the stable, so indignant and badly timed that Hannah startled. The man turned his head. "That is Mabel," he said, as though the name explained every problem in the world. "She hates the rain, but she also refuses to stay indoors." A small donkey pushed her head through the stable door. Her ears stood straight up, a dark tuft of hair fell across her forehead, and a strip of wool blanket hung from her teeth. The man sighed. That was her blanket. For the first time all day, Hannah felt the beginning of a smile. It did not fully appear, but her features softened. The man looked back at her. "My name is Ethan Sawyer." "Hannah Moore." Ethan opened the gate. "You can sleep in the room beside the honey shed. It is not comfortable, but it is dry." Hannah did not enter immediately. "I can clean, wash, cook, help with animals, whatever is needed. We will decide tomorrow. I prefer everything to be clear from the beginning." Ethan looked at her again, no longer as a stranger caught in the rain, but as someone trying to protect the little she still possessed. "Fair enough. Tomorrow you can help me put the storage room in order. And if you know how to cook, you can light the kitchen stove before breakfast." "I know how to cook." "Then that will be enough." Hannah stepped through the gate. It did not feel like entering a permanent refuge. It felt like being granted a pause. But that evening, a pause was more than she had owned all day. Ethan walked ahead without asking unnecessary questions or offering false comfort. He simply opened the door to a low storage building that smelled of wax, old wood, and honey. "You can sleep here," he said. "There is a blanket in the chest, unless Mabel found it first." The donkey brayed from the stable as if she understood the accusation. Henne Lord Herr Beck. Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Ethan will do. She hesitated. Thank you, Ethan. He nodded and left for the house. Hannah remained alone in the storage room. Thin lines of evening light slipped through gaps in the roof. Shelves held dusty jars, honey tools, blocks of wax wrapped in paper, and stacks of unused labels. Everything seemed suspended, as though the farm continued working from habit rather than hope. Hannah ran one finger over a dusty jar. Then she looked at her muddy boots, her canvas bag, and Mrs. Eleanor's recipe book hidden among her clothes. She did not know why, but the sadness in that room felt different from the sadness of the abandoned bakery. It was not the sadness of something dead. It was the sadness of something still waiting. Ethan returned later with a bowl of broth, a piece of bread, and a candle. The kitchen fire is already out, he said. This is all I have ready. Hannah accepted the bowl with both hands. It is more than I expected. He placed the candle on a crate and glanced up at the roof. If water comes through, move the bed toward the far wall. A narrow cot stood in the back with a folded quilt on top. One corner of the quilt had been chewed through, almost certainly by Mabel, but it was dry. I won't cause trouble, Hannah said. Ethan looked at her. I did not say you were causing trouble. The sentence was not kind in the usual way, but it was not cold either. It was exact, as Ethan himself seemed to be. I will still keep my side of the agreement tomorrow, Hannah said. First, rest. He left and closed the door quietly. Hannah ate on the edge of the cot. The broth was simple and slightly too salty, but it was hot. Only when warmth moved through her chest did she understand how much cold she had carried all day. Outside, the rain intensified. From the stable came the sound of Mabel moving something she was probably not supposed to touch. Every few minutes the donkey brayed with solemn outrage, as if the entire storm were a personal insult. Hannah looked toward the door and allowed herself a faint smile. You don't know how to be quiet either, do you? She whispered. Mabel answered with another rough cry. Hannah shook her head, almost amused. Then she opened the recipe book. Some pages were written by Mrs. Eleanor. Others held Hannah's own small notes in the margins. If the honey is too strong, soften it with baked apple. Save orange peel when fresh fruit is scarce. Stale bread can still become pudding. Every recipe in that book was a way of resisting need. Mrs. Eleanor used to say that poverty taught two things, surrender or invention. She preferred invention. Hannah closed the notebook and looked at the empty jars on the shelves. There were too many of them for a farm doing well. Some carried yellowed labels. Others were clean but forgotten. In one corner stood old wax molds, a small hand press, and a basket of shriveled apples that no one had bothered to throw away. Hannah touched nothing. This was not her place. Still, habit began arranging the room in her mind. Wet cloths should not lie beside dry sacks. Dust should not cover the jars. Anything that could rot needed to be moved from the floor. It was not much. But sometimes a place begins changing when someone picks up what everyone else has dropped. Hannah removed her wet boots and set them beside the door. She lay down fully dressed with the canvas bag beneath her head, afraid even in sleep that it might disappear. Rain struck the roof. She thought of the closed bakery, the cold oven, and the kneading table she had wiped one last time. She thought of Mrs. Eleanor's old hands breaking bread and her tired voice saying that a recipe could keep a person from being left with nothing. Only then did Hannah's eyes fill. She did not sob. She simply allowed the tears to move silently into the pillow, without witnesses. Not because she had been defeated. Sometimes the body must release a little weight before it can stand again. In the main house, Ethan put out his lamp later than usual. From his window he could see the door of the honey shed. He did not know why he kept looking toward it. Perhaps the young woman's arrival had disturbed the stillness of the yard. Perhaps no one had entered his farm in years carrying a single bag and such exhausted dignity. Mabel brayed again. Ethan closed his eyes patiently. You will be trouble tomorrow too, he muttered. The donkey struck one hoof against the floor. A short laugh escaped him, so brief it was almost not there. Then he looked once more toward the honey shed. Rain fell on the hives, the crooked apple trees, the old roof, and the dark yard. Everything seemed unchanged. But it was not. Somewhere on the farm, a stranger slept beside a recipe book. In the stable, a stubborn donkey chewed what remained of a blanket. And inside the wooden hives, Thousands of bees resisted the cold by gathering around one small, nearly invisible center of warmth. The night moved forward. No one could yet have said it, but something on Sawyer Farm had begun to move with it. Hannah woke before dawn, not from habit, though years in a bakery had trained her body to rise before the rest of the world, but from a dull thud outside. Then came another. After that, a frantic humming rose from the yard. At first she did not remember where she was. She saw the low ceiling, the empty jars, the burned-down candle, and her boots still damp beside the door. Then memory returned, the rain, the road, the gate, and Ethan Sawyer allowing her one night without demanding a full explanation. She heard his voice outside. No. No, no. He was not shouting. It was worse than shouting, the controlled urgency of someone watching something precious slip away. Hannah rose at once, tied her boots badly, and opened the door. The yard was flooded with grey dawn. Rain had weakened, but it had fallen so heavily overnight that the ground could no longer absorb it. A drainage channel had overflowed beside the hives. 2 hive boxes leaned dangerously. Their bases were sinking into the muddy water, and the buzzing around them had become sharp and panicked. Ethan knelt in the mud, trying to lift one box without disturbing it. His sleeves were soaked and dirty to the elbows. What should I do? Hannah called. He looked up, surprised to see her awake. Stay back. They are frightened. They are sinking. Ethan did not answer. His silence was answer enough. Hannah looked around and saw empty feed sacks beneath the awning, a wide board leaning against the shed, and a pile of dry straw under a canvas cover. She ran toward them. We need something underneath the hives. I told you to stay back. And I asked what I could do. Ethan clenched his jaw. There was no time to argue. Bring the board. Slowly. Do not strike the boxes. Hannah dragged it through the mud. Water filled her boots and cold climbed her legs, but she kept moving. When she reached him, she saw bees clustered at the hive entrance, confused by moisture and motion. Fear went through her like a wire. One bee landed on her sleeve. Hannah froze, fighting the instinct to shake it away. Do not frighten her, Ethan said quietly. If you panic, the others will feel it. Then I won't panic, Hannah answered, though her voice was less steady than she wanted. Ethan looked at her for 1 second. Something in his expression changed. He had decided to trust her exactly enough to continue. Together they lifted the first hive just high enough to slide the board beneath it. The weight was awkward, and Ethan could not make sudden movements. Hannah bit her lip to keep from groaning. A bee stung her near the wrist. Pain flashed sharp and immediate. Tears sprang to her eyes. You were stung, Ethan said. Later. Move away. No. If I let go now, it will fall. It was the first time he had spoken her name without distance. Hannah. I am fine. He did not argue again. Together they secured the first hive, then the second. Hannah brought dry straw and sacks. Ethan cleared mud from the entrances, adjusted the covers, and spoke to the bees in a voice so low it was almost part of the humming. When the water finally stopped running beneath the boxes, the yard settled into relative quiet. The bees still buzzed, but no longer in panic. Hannah sat on a stone without realizing she was trembling. Mud covered her skirt. Wet hair clung to her face, and her hands had turned red with cold. Ethan approached. Let me see your wrist. She held it out. He removed the stinger with his fingernail, then fetched a clean wet cloth. He did not say, I warned you. He did not call her reckless. He simply wrapped the swelling with the patience of someone accustomed to injured animals, split branches, and small things that had to be saved before it was too late. It hurts, Hannah admitted. Yes. I thought the first sting might hurt less. The first one never does. A breath escaped her, almost a laugh. Ethan looked toward the raised hives, then back at her. If you had not brought that board, I would have lost at least one colony. Hannah lowered her eyes. I only did what needed doing. Not everyone does. The sentence remained between them, simple and heavy. Hannah touched the cloth around her wrist. Then I suppose I have paid for the night. Ethan studied her in the pale morning light. No. You did more than that. Mabel pushed her head from the stable at precisely the moment the danger had passed. She gave a proud bray despite having contributed nothing. Hannah looked at her wearily. And where were you when we needed someone to move the hives? Mabel chewed a piece of straw. Against his will, Ethan laughed. It was not an open laugh, only a narrow crack in his seriousness, but for a man like him, it was enough to change the morning. Come inside, he said. You need warmth. I can start cleaning the storage room first. Your hand first. The way he said it was not the order of an employer. It was an awkward attempt to care without naming it care. Hannah noticed the difference. The kitchen in the main house was almost as cold as the storage room. It was not a poor kitchen. There was a solid table, an iron stove, pots on the wall, and a window overlooking the yard. But everything seemed used without affection, as though meals were made there from necessity rather than the desire to sit and remain. Ethan lit the stove. Hannah stood beside the table with her bandaged wrist, uncertain whether to sit or search for work. Sit, he said. I can help. You already did. She sat on the edge of a chair, ready to rise if needed. Ethan heated water and took a small jar from a shelf. Inside was a thick salve with the smell of herbs. Thomas makes this from beeswax and rosemary, he explained. It helps with stings. Who is Thomas? He has worked here since before I could tell a bee from a fly. Ethan applied the salve carefully. His hands were rough, marked with small cuts and old work stains. They were not hands practiced in tenderness, which made the gesture feel more honest. It is not serious, he said. I am glad. I need my hands. Everyone does. At that moment, the door opened. Thomas Reed entered carrying a basket of tools. He was a broad-shouldered man with a grey mustache and small, observant eyes that revealed little. He stopped when he saw Hannah at the table with her wrist wrapped. So the guest has met the bees. The bees met her, Ethan corrected. Thomas set down the basket and studied Hannah with a mixture of curiosity and caution. I am not sure they liked me, she said. But I did what I could. Thomas made a low sound that might have been approval. That is already more than some people do. He glanced toward the yard. I saw someone move the dry sacks away from the wet cloths in the storage room. I noticed they would rot if the water reached them, Hannah said. Thomas looked from her to Ethan. Arrived in the dark and already putting the house in order. Hannah stiffened, unsure whether he was mocking her. I did not mean to interfere. I did not say it was a bad thing. Thomas drank water straight from a cup and left without another word. He was not friendly, but neither was he hostile. Like Ethan, he seemed to belong to a world of men who spoke little so they would not have to explain what they felt. When they were alone, Hannah pulled her hand back. I will leave when the rain stops. Ethan looked through the window. A fine rain had begun again. The road to town will be worse today. I have walked worse roads. I do not doubt it. Silence settled over the kitchen. Hannah realized he was trying to say something and could not find the shape of it. Ethan placed both hands on the back of a chair. There is work here. She waited. The pay is small, he continued, but I can offer meals, a dry room, and a few dollars each week. The storage building needs cleaning. The jars need washing. Sacks need mending. Fallen apples need sorting. And I could use someone who knows how to light a stove without burning the bottom of every pot. Hannah looked down at the table. The offer was modest. To her, it felt enormous. But accepting too quickly frightened her. People without homes were often mistaken for people willing to accept anything. As an employee, she asked. As a paid helper. With the amount agreed beforehand. Yes. And if either of us wants the arrangement to end, we say so directly. Ethan nodded. I do not want to owe for kindness that becomes a debt later, Hannah said. Her words came out harder than she intended. Ethan did not take offense. Perhaps he understood where they came from. That is not how I collect debts. Hannah met his eyes. I do not know you. That is why I have to ask. Outside, Mabel struck something against the stable door. Thomas shouted her name with weary impatience. The donkey brayed as if she had been unjustly accused. Hannah exhaled slowly. I can stay for a few days. Ethan nodded once. Then we will begin when the swelling goes down. I can begin now. You can eat now. Hannah nearly said she was not hungry. Then the smell of hot water, bread, and a little cheese reminded her that pride required a living body to carry it. All right. Ethan cut bread and set it in front of her. There were no smiles and no grand promises. Yet for the first time since leaving the bakery, Hannah felt that an agreement had been made without asking her to kneel emotionally in order to accept it. On that cold morning, the dignity of a fair bargain was worth more than a clean bed. During the days that followed, Hannah discovered that Sawyer Farm was not abandoned. It was tired. That was different. The bees still worked. The apple trees still produced fruit, though much of it fell and spoiled beneath the branches. The kitchen stove still burned well. The jars could be washed, the sacks repaired, the curtains shaken free of dust, and the old table made useful again. Hannah began with the honey shed. She separated broken jars from whole ones, washed what could be saved, stacked usable labels, folded the cloths, and lifted everything that might rot away from the damp floor. Thomas watched her from the doorway on the first morning with his arms crossed. "If you keep moving things," he said, "I will never find anything. If you found anything before, Mr. Reed, you have an extraordinary memory." Thomas stared at her. For 1 second, Hannah regretted speaking. Then he gave a dry laugh. "You have a sharp tongue for a baker." "Only when I am accused unfairly." After that, Thomas stopped watching her quite so closely. The kitchen was harder. Not because the work was difficult, but because it awakened memories. The table was different from Mrs. Eleanor's, and so was the stove. Yet brushing flour from a board, coaxing a flame to life, and touching warm dough made Hannah feel that part of her former life still lived in her hands. On the third day, she found a basket of wrinkled apples near the shed. They were not rotten. Some were bruised and others carried dark marks on their skin, but when she cut one open, the flesh was sweet and fragrant. "Do you use these?" she asked Ethan. He was repairing a latch near the stable. Mabel stood beside him and raised her head at the word use, as though the lawful rights of all animals were being discussed. "They are too damaged to sell," Ethan said. "I did not ask whether you could sell them whole." He looked at her cautiously. "What are you planning?" "Something small. It would be a shame to waste them." He did not question her further. Perhaps the word waste carried nearly as much weight for him as the word hunger. That evening, Hannah lit the stove, cut away the bruises, sliced the good apple thin, and simmered it with a little water. She added 1 spoonful of sugar, the honey left at the bottom of an old jar, a pinch of flour, and crumbs from stale bread. It was not a precise recipe. It was one of those dishes created from what remained rather than from what anyone wished they had. The smell spread slowly. First it filled the kitchen. Then it traveled through the open doorway and into the yard. Thomas appeared holding a coil of rope. "What burned?" "Nothing." "Then what smells like that?" "Hope, if the oven cooperates." Mabel arrived behind him, drawn by a sacred calling toward anything edible. She pushed her nose through the doorway and knocked a chair sideways. "No," Hannah told her. "This is not for you." The donkey looked deeply insulted. Ethan came in a few minutes later and stopped at the threshold as if the scent had surprised him. Hannah removed a plain baking dish from the oven. Its edges had browned. It was not elegant, only apple and honey bread pudding, dark, humble, and warm. "I used stale bread," she said before anyone asked. "And the damaged apples." Thomas stepped closer. "It looks better than most of what I have eaten in this kitchen." "You cooked most of what you ate in this kitchen," Ethan said. "That is exactly why I said it." Hannah lowered her head to hide a smile. She served 3 small portions. Ethan did not take his immediately, not because he distrusted it, but because he seemed unsure what to do with a kitchen that smelled alive again. He tasted 1 bite. Hannah waited. She did not need praise, but some part of her needed to know whether her hands were still capable of making something good. "Not bad," Ethan said. Thomas snorted. "That means he thinks it is excellent." Warmth rose to Hannah's face. She turned toward the table and pretended to be busy. Mabel, tired of being ignored, stretched her neck through the doorway and bit a corner from the pudding left in the pan. "Mabel!" Hannah cried. The donkey backed away with her mouth full, absolutely convinced of her innocence. Thomas burst into laughter. Ethan lifted one hand to his forehead but could not hide his smile. Hannah raised the dish beyond Mabel's reach. "You have no conscience." "She has the appetite of a thief," Thomas said. The laughter did not last long. No one in that house seemed accustomed to holding laughter for very long. But for a few seconds, the kitchen stopped feeling like a room people merely passed through. Ethan looked at the clean jars beside the window, the warm baking dish, and Hannah trying unsuccessfully to look stern at a donkey. It had been years since Sawyer Farm smelled of freshly prepared food. Even longer since laughter in the kitchen had belonged to the present instead of arriving from memory. The next idea came because of Mabel. One morning, Hannah sorted fallen apples into 3 baskets: good fruit for storage, bruised fruit for cooking, and apples too soft for anyone except the animals. Mabel waited until no one was watching. With the patience of an experienced criminal, she pushed the middle basket, selected an apple, and knocked the rest across the yard. Hannah ran from the shed at the sound of the disaster. Mabel stood amid the scattered fruit with 1 apple in her teeth. She did not flee. Running would have been an admission of guilt. Instead, she chewed slowly and trusted everyone's lack of evidence. Ethan came from the hives. What has she done now? She has reorganized my system. Thomas approached with a hammer over one shoulder and surveyed the apples. For a donkey, she has strong opinions about management. Hannah bent to collect the fruit. Several apples had split open, releasing a sweet scent into the wet earth. Then she paused. She lifted half an apple, smelled it, and looked toward the shed where the honey jar stood. What is it? Ethan asked. Nothing. Or perhaps something. He had begun to recognize that tone. It was the same one she used before turning stale bread into a dish Thomas had requested again without asking directly. Tell me. At the bakery, Mrs. Eleanor sometimes cooked apple with honey when sugar was expensive. If the balance is right, it does not taste like scraps. It tastes like autumn. Thomas narrowed his eyes. You mean flavoring the honey? Not hiding it. Giving it another note. Ethan glanced toward the hives. Honey already has flavor. Yes, and this farm already has apples. But the apples are falling to the ground. People buy honey. They may not buy experiments. Hannah was not offended. She understood that men like Ethan often feared ridicule more than work. We can make a very small batch. Only a test. We. The word left his mouth before he considered it. Hannah lowered her eyes carefully. I can do it alone if you let me use 1 jar that is not good enough for sale. Ethan remained silent. Mabel took another apple. 1 test, he said at last. That evening, Hannah worked as if she were preparing for an important customer, though her audience consisted only of Ethan, Thomas, Mabel, and several thousand bees. She washed a small jar, sliced an apple thin, and dried the pieces near the fire so they would release less water. She grated a little orange peel that she had saved from the bakery and added a pinch of cinnamon with the nearly religious thrift Mrs. Eleanor had taught her. Then she warmed the honey slowly, never allowing it to boil. The first attempt became too thick. The second was bitter from too much peel. The third smelled wonderful, but moisture from the apple ruined the texture. Ethan did not say, I told you so. Thomas did not either. For Hannah, that silence was a form of respect. On the 4th attempt, the smell changed. It was no longer merely honey or fruit. It was warm and rounded, carrying something from the old bakery and something from the woods after rain. Hannah held the jar silently. Ethan approached. Well, I do not know. You do. She looked at him. Her expression held more fear than triumph. Hannah had lost too much to trust good signs quickly. Thomas took a clean spoon, tasted a little, and frowned. Hannah stiffened. Is it bad? No. Then why are you making that face? Because now I want another spoonful, and that seems like a problem. Ethan tasted it next. He knew the honey from his farm as a person knows the rooms of his childhood. He could tell when the wildflowers had been strong, when a season had been dry, and whether a hive had worked closer to the hill or the orchard. But this was different. The apple did not erase the honey. It walked beside it, as if Sawyer Farm had found another voice without ceasing to be itself. It is good, he said. Hannah released a breath very slowly. It can be better. Everything can be better, Thomas said. But this can already be sold. Ethan did not answer immediately. Selling meant showing. Showing meant risking judgment. For him, exposure had often been followed by loss. Hannah seemed to sense his hesitation and did not press. It was only a test. Ethan looked again at the jar. Make 3 more. She blinked. 3. Small ones. We need to know whether the result can be repeated. Mabel, bored by a conversation in which no one offered her food, pushed the nearly empty basket. One apple rolled to Hannah's feet. She picked it up and smiled openly for the first time in days. It seems she insists. Mabel always insists, Ethan said. This time, she may be right. The donkey brayed, delighted by her new reputation as a business advisor. That night, Hannah placed the first successful jar beside the shed window and studied it by candlelight. Its color was dark gold with amber reflections. It was not perfect. It might not even be enough. But it had been created from things others would have discarded. Bruised apples, forgotten honey, dried orange peel saved from habit, an old jar, and a kitchen only beginning to grow warm again. Hannah placed her fingers against the glass and thought of the bakery, Mrs. Eleanor, and the road beneath the rain. She thought of Ethan saying, "Make 3 more, no grand praise, only the precise amount of trust required for a second attempt." Outside, the bees slept in a cluster around their warmth. Mabel brayed once from the stable, demanding credit for the discovery. Hannah blew out the candle. For the first time since leaving Maple Hollow, tomorrow did not feel like a threat. It felt, carefully, fearfully, but truly, like a possibility. The next jars were not identical. One was too sweet, as if the apple were trying to hide the honey. Another lost its aroma. A third turned cloudy. Thomas argued that people in town would not inspect it so closely if it tasted good. People inspect everything, Hannah said, holding a jar toward the window. If they do not inspect before buying, they inspect afterward when they want to complain. Thomas laughed dryly. That is true. People always find time to complain. Ethan listened from the work table while studying old labels. At first, he had treated the experiment cautiously, like a branch he was willing to let grow but expected the wind to break. But as he watched Hannah repeat the process with patience, he began to look at the jars differently. This was not decoration or a kitchen amusement. It was work. Real work was something Ethan respected. Hannah turned one corner of the shed into a small testing space. There were sliced apples, orange peel drying near the stove, clean cloths, one wooden spoon, and the recipe book open to pages crowded with new notes. Do not overheat. Use less peel. Dry the apple. Do not boil it. Honey must still taste like honey. She stared at the final sentence for a long time. Perhaps it applied to more than honey. Adapting did not have to mean disappearing. Improving something did not require rejecting what it had been. In the middle of the week, Ethan decided to take 3 jars into town. Only to ask an opinion, he said. Whose opinion? Mrs. Parker. She sells bread, cheese, preserves, and dry goods at the general store. Her tongue is sharp, but she does not lie about food. That does not sound comforting. It is not meant to. Thomas, mending a strap near the door, added, If she says it is bad, believe her. If she says it is acceptable, buy more jars. Hannah pretended not to be nervous, but she washed each jar twice, cut squares of cloth for the lids, and tied the string more carefully than necessary. She wrote a simple label. Apple honey, autumn test batch. No farm name. No personal name. Ethan watched her. You can come with me. Hannah stopped. No. Not today. It is your recipe. It is your honey. And your recipe. He said it as a fact, not a courtesy. Part of Hannah wanted to go. Another part, the older, more cautious part, remembered that a small town was not always kind to a woman without family, a respected last name, or a clear explanation for why she lived on an unmarried man's farm. First, let us see whether Mrs. Parker spits it out, she said. Thomas laughed. Ethan nodded without pressuring her. He returned near sunset with 2 empty jars and 1 half full. Hannah stepped outside before realizing she had done so. What did she say? Ethan climbed down from the wagon far too calmly. She said it was strange. Hannah's stomach tightened. Strange. Then she said strangeness is not always a defect. Thomas appeared behind Hannah. That is practically a speech from Mrs. Parker. Ethan took several coins from his pocket and placed them on the shed table. She bought 2 jars. She kept the third open to offer samples to customers. Hannah stared at the money. It was not much. The coins did not shine differently from those Mrs. Eleanor's nephew had placed on the bakery table. Yet the earlier money had sounded like a door closing. These coins sounded like a door beginning to open. She actually paid. Hannah asked. Mrs. Parker does not give money out of pity, Thomas said, or affection, or by accident. Hannah touched one coin with the tip of her finger as if she needed proof that it was real. The texture still needs improvement. Ethan looked at her with something close to amusement. You sold 2 jars, and you are already criticizing the next batch. If they bought it from curiosity, they will buy it a second time only if it deserves to be bought. He did not answer at once. That way of thinking pleased him more than he wanted to admit. Hannah had neither vanity nor false humility. She possessed the seriousness of someone who wanted to build things that lasted. Then we will keep testing, he said. Hannah raised her eyes. We. Ethan lifted one of the empty jars. The honey is still mine. She understood the joke a second late because Ethan rarely made them. When she did, a small smile appeared. Mabel brayed from the doorway, demanding a share of the commercial success. Thomas pointed at her. You are not receiving a commission. The donkey struck one hoof against the floor. In the days that followed, a new rhythm settled over Sawyer Farm. It did not transform overnight, but something shifted. Ethan inspected each hive as if it might now serve more than one purpose. Hannah tested proportions, dried apples, washed jars, and mended cloth. Thomas pretended not to arrive whenever the honey was warm, though he appeared with remarkable consistency. On Saturday, Mrs. Parker came to the farm herself. She was a short, broad-shouldered woman with a dark scarf around her hair and a gaze capable of driving a lie from a person before he finished speaking. She carried a basket and entered the yard without waiting for much permission. So you are the young woman with the strange honey, she said when she saw Hannah. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron. Does strange mean bad? If it were bad, I would not be here. Ethan came around the apple trees. Mrs. Parker. Your honey needed help years ago, she told him. I said so once, and you made the face of an offended preacher. Thomas called from the stable. That is also true. Ethan ignored him. Mrs. Parker tasted the newest mixture. She remained silent, then took another spoonful. Hannah tensed. It lacks a little confidence, the older woman said, but it already has memory. Memory. It tastes like something a person ate as a child, even if she never did. Hannah did not know how to answer. Mrs. Parker placed coins on the table. I will take 4 jars for Sunday. If they sell, I will return. If they do not sell, I will also return and tell you exactly why. Then she noticed Mabel trying to push her nose into the basket. And I am selling nothing to this thief. Mabel brayed. No, Mrs. Parker pointed one finger at her. Do not argue with me. For the first time, Ethan laughed without trying to hide it. Hannah heard him and looked up involuntarily. It was not a loud laugh, but it changed his face. It made him look younger, or perhaps simply less alone. He noticed her gaze and became serious too quickly. Hannah lowered her eyes toward the jars. The apple honey had begun to sell. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fruit. The shed no longer seemed abandoned. And in the middle of that small, almost domestic hope, Hannah felt the first thread of fear. She had learned that when something began to acquire value, the world did not always celebrate. Sometimes it moved closer to see who had dared to rise. The rumors began without form. Hannah noticed them first during a trip into Maple Hollow with Thomas to buy flour, string, and cinnamon. Mrs. Parker had ordered more jars, and Hannah did not want to hide forever. Fear, when fed too generously, eventually occupied more space than the person carrying it. Inside the general store, the owner was measuring lentils for a customer. He looked up. His gaze moved from Hannah to Thomas, then back to Hannah. The conversation lost its natural rhythm. Good morning, Hannah said. Morning. The woman buying lentils did not greet her. She only tightened her mouth and looked at the sacks. Hannah purchased paper, string, and spice. The storekeeper remained formally polite and emotionally cold. As she left, she heard a fragment of a whisper. That is the one. Nothing more was needed. Outside, a group of young men stopped speaking when Hannah passed. 2 farmers near the fountain greeted Thomas but did not look at her. She climbed into the wagon silently. Thomas placed the flour behind them and took the reins. Do not listen to everything people are too cowardly to say to your face. Sometimes what they do not say weighs more. Thomas gave a low grunt. That is true. They traveled in silence for several minutes. What are they saying? Hannah finally asked. Thomas did not answer immediately. He was not a man who softened blows, but neither did he strike without need. That a single young woman is living on the property of a single man for reasons beyond employment. Hannah watched the wet trees along the road. The words did not surprise her. They hurt precisely because she had expected them. Does Ethan know? He will know before supper, if not from me then from someone else. Some customers may stop buying from him because of me. Because of their crooked minds. That may not change the result. Thomas looked at her from the corner of his eye. You speak like someone who has paid for many other people's sins. Hannah did not answer. Back at the farm, she carried the supplies into the shed and worked with more precision than necessary. She cut equal lengths of string, washed jars, dried apples, and recorded figures. From the outside, she appeared calm. Inside, every movement was a way not to think about the dirt of other people's words. Ethan returned from checking the upper hives at dusk. Thomas called him aside near the stable. Hannah could not hear the conversation, but she watched Ethan's face harden, not with surprise, but with the exhausted recognition of an old wound reopening. At supper, no one spoke. Mabel usually appeared at the kitchen door to beg shamelessly. That evening, she pushed her head inside, received one serious look from Hannah, and retreated 2 steps. Even the donkey seemed to understand that it was not a good time for theft. After clearing the dishes, Hannah remained beside the sink. I should leave, she said. Ethan, who had been closing the window, stopped. Thomas raised his eyes but did not interfere. Why? Ethan asked. Because this will cost you customers. It has already begun. Rumors are not new to me. But I am new. He watched her without speaking. Hannah gripped the towel in both hands. She did not want to sound wounded, though she was. She did not want to sound proud, though pride was part of what kept her standing. You gave me work and a room, she said. I accepted because it was a fair agreement. But if my presence begins taking income away from you, then the agreement is no longer fair. I did not come here to become another burden. The word burden remained in the kitchen. Ethan placed both hands on the back of a chair. For one moment, his expression revealed more than severity. Anger, yes, but not at her. People talk because they dislike not knowing where to place someone they do not understand. That will not stop them. No. And it will not bring back customers if they leave. No. His honesty disarmed her. It would have been easier to argue if he had denied the obvious. Then you understand why I should go. I understand why you think so. That is not the same thing. Thomas rose slowly. I am going to check whether Mabel has eaten the stable door. She likes to feel included. He left with rough kindness, giving them privacy. The kitchen became still. Ethan looked at the crumbs left on the table from the bread Hannah had baked that morning. When Claire left, he said at last, the town talked for months. Hannah lowered her eyes. It was the first time he had mentioned his former wife without being forced toward the subject. I am sorry. I was sorry too. Then the grief eased. He paused. The shame stayed longer. Hannah tightened her grip on the towel. I do not want people using me to humiliate you again. They are not laughing at me because of you. They are laughing because they believe a man who was abandoned should remain alone so the story stays simple for them. She looked at him. Ethan spoke quietly, but each word came from a place built over years. If you leave because of what they say, they will believe they were right. If I stay, you may lose more. Perhaps. And that does not matter to you. It matters. He breathed slowly. But not everything that matters should be allowed to command us. Hannah did not know what to do with that answer. It was not a promise or a declaration. It was not even comforting. It was a decision. I can stay until the harvest fair, she said after a long silence. If things become worse by then, I will leave. Ethan seemed about to say something more, but did not. All right. I will work as before. That was never in question. The sentence touched her more deeply than she expected. From the stable came a crash. Thomas shouted, Mabel, drop it. The donkey brayed with theatrical outrage. Hannah closed her eyes for 1 second. Even on tense days, life stubbornly left a narrow opening through which people could breathe. Ethan looked toward the door. She is eating the new broom. Then tomorrow there will be nothing left to sweep away the rumors, Hannah said without thinking. The dryness of the remark surprised them both. Then Ethan smiled faintly, and Hannah did too. It was not enough to erase fear. It was enough to keep fear from occupying everything. That night, Hannah returned to the shed and did not pack her bag. She left it beside the cot where it had been. For a long time, however, she looked at it. She could still leave. Knowing that gave her peace. For the first time, the thought of leaving caused more pain than relief. Claire Bennett arrived 2 days later in a polished cream-colored automobile with clean wheels, a driver, and a dress far too elegant for a muddy farm road. No announcement was needed. The sound of the engine was enough to make Thomas look up from the stable and Ethan stop beside the hives. Mabel brayed with the special energy she reserved for suspicious guests. Hannah was in the yard drying clean jars when the car stopped at the gate. At first, she felt no fear, only the instinctive stillness of a person who understands that something is about to enter a home before she knows its name. Ethan froze for 1 second. Only one. Hannah saw it. Then he walked toward the gate with his face closed. The woman stepped from the car with the driver's help. She was beautiful in a carefully constructed way, not only because of her dress and perfectly arranged hair, but because she had the habit of entering any place knowing people would look. "Ethan," she said with a measured smile, "you still have the same gait." Her name fell into the yard without explanation. Claire. Hannah understood. Thomas understood too. He lowered the rope in his hand and remained beside the stable, pretending not to watch. Claire looked around with a mixture of nostalgia and evaluation. The hives, the apple trees, the shed, the table of clean jars. Then her eyes stopped on Hannah. She did not immediately ask who Hannah was. First she assessed the plain dress, the work-mark hands, the apron, the unadorned hair, and the straight posture of a woman uncertain whether she would be sent away but refusing to shrink. "The farm seems livelier," Claire said. "There is work," Ethan replied. "There always was. There was not always someone eager to do it." Her smile did not change, but something cold moved beneath it. Hannah set down the cloth. "Good afternoon." Claire inclined her head. "And you are?" Ethan answered before Hannah could. "Hannah Moore. She works here." Claire looked again at the jars. "How interesting. I heard something in town about new honey. It seems the story was true." "Apparently," Ethan said. "I am glad you finally decided to change something." The sentence was polite in shape and cruel in purpose. Ethan did not respond. Claire lifted one empty jar toward the light. "Was the idea yours?" she asked Hannah. "The recipe was." "How convenient. A baker on a bee farm." "I was a baker." "Ah. Was." Claire replaced the jar with delicate care. "Life does move people from place to place without asking permission," Hannah said. Claire looked at her, perhaps surprised that she had answered without lowering her head. "That is true. Although it is useful to know what place one finally occupies." Ethan stepped forward. "Why are you here, Claire?" She turned toward him gently. "To say hello. I heard you were selling something new and wanted to see it. Is that a crime?" "No." "Then do not greet me as though I came to steal a hive." Mabel, moving silently during the tension, chose that moment to grab the end of a silk scarf hanging from Claire's handbag. Claire spun around. "What is that animal doing?" Hannah moved quickly and caught the scarf before Mabel pulled it away. "No, Mabel. That is not food." The donkey resisted, clearly convinced that it was food. Thomas coughed to hide a laugh. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, a man familiar with this domestic humiliation. Hannah finally freed the scarf and handed it back. "I am sorry. She takes too many liberties with other people's belongings." Claire accepted the cloth with 2 fingers. "I see she is not the only one." The yard seemed to grow colder. Hannah felt the blow, but she did not give Claire the satisfaction of seeing it. She lowered her hands and stood still. Ethan's voice became dangerously calm. "Claire." She smiled. "I did not say anything." "Exactly." For several seconds, only Mabel could be heard chewing something else she probably should not have possessed. Claire returned the scarf to her bag. "I do not want to interrupt. Perhaps I will attend the harvest fair. It would be interesting to see how this new chapter of Sawyer Farm performs." The way she said new chapter made Hannah understand that the visit was not over simply because Claire left. She had not come to inspect the farm. She had come to inspect territory. Ethan walked her to the gate without touching the automobile. When he returned, his face looked more tired than before. Thomas spoke first. She did not come for honey. Ethan did not answer. Hannah began lifting jars from the table one by one. She was your wife. Yes. The one who left. Ethan looked at her. There was no accusation in her face, only a question that did not wish to intrude. Yes, he said again. Hannah nodded. I understand. I do not think you understand all of it. No. But I understand enough not to ask tonight. Ethan seemed grateful without saying so. Mabel came to Hannah and pushed her nose into one hand. Hannah looked down. You were no help. The donkey lowered her ears with false innocence. Thomas picked up the rope. She helped reveal the guest's character. No one laughed loudly, but the remark left a little air in the yard. Later, Hannah noticed that her hands were trembling. Claire had not shouted or openly insulted her. She had done something more skillful. She had reminded Hannah that in their world, a woman without a home had to justify every step, while another woman could arrive in a fine automobile and call a threat a visit. Hannah looked at the clean jars, took one, polished it again, and set it in line. She would not break because of one sentence. But she now understood that the harvest fair would be more than a sale. It would be a trial. That evening, Ethan did not come to supper at the usual time. Hannah saw him through the kitchen window sitting on a bench beside the shed, elbows on his knees, staring toward the dark apple trees. He did not look as though he were resting. He looked as though he were continuing an old conversation with someone no longer present. Thomas ate silently, wiped his mouth with the back of one hand, and stood. I am going to bed. If Mabel learns to open doors tonight, do not wake me. I have already done my share for this world. After clearing the table, Hannah poured hot broth into a cup and went outside. She was not certain she was doing the right thing. Approaching some men in their silence was like touching a wound. But Ethan was not a man who asked for company. Perhaps for that reason, he needed it more than he could say. I brought you this. He looked up. Thank you. Hannah gave him the cup and sat at the other end of the bench, leaving a careful distance. For a while, they said nothing. The night smelled of cold earth, beeswax, and dried apple. Mabel breathed noisily in the stable. Farther away, the bees slept inside their wooden boxes, gathered around their own small warmth. Claire was not always like that, Ethan said suddenly. Hannah did not look at him directly. No one shows everything at the beginning. He held the cup between both hands. When we married, I believed work was enough. If the farm earned money, if the house stood, if there was food on the table, then a life could hold together. He paused. Sometimes people need more. I know that now. The words carried no excuse. She wanted different clothes, travel, conversation that did not smell of a stable. I either failed to see it or refused to. Then a traveling salesman came through Maple Hollow. He had money, easy words, and hands without cracks. Claire left with him before the season ended. Hannah felt the impulse to say something comforting, but did not. Some pain did not want to be covered too quickly. The town talked, Ethan continued. Some people pitied me. Others enjoyed it. I still do not know which was worse. Pity can humiliate too. He looked at her. Yes. Hannah sat with her hands folded in her lap. Light from the kitchen barely reached her profile. When the bakery closed, she said, though he had not asked, Mrs. Eleanor's nephew told me I could stay one night. He said it as though he were granting a great favor. Perhaps he was. I had worked there 5 years. I cared for Mrs. Eleanor when she could not stand. I lit the oven even when I had a fever. And in the end, I was simply someone who had to leave before the buyer arrived. Ethan did not look away. That was unjust. Yes, but it was legal, and that is enough for many people. She lowered her voice. I had nowhere to go. No place where I could arrive without being reminded that I was in the way. Ethan understood the sentence better than she expected. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was shared silence, the kind that does not remove sorrow but makes its edges less rough. Claire will try again, Hannah said. Yes. She did not only want to see the farm.
No.
She wanted to know whether she could still make you look backward. Ethan tightened both hands around the cup. Perhaps she can. The honesty cost him something. Hannah heard it. That does not mean you won her back.
No.
It means she wounded you in a place that still hurts. He exhaled slowly. You speak as though you know houses where touching one object wakes 10 memories.
I do.
She explained no further. Mabel brayed from the stable, long and dramatic, as if outraged at being excluded from the conversation. Hannah looked in that direction. She probably has painful memories too. Ethan frowned slightly. Her most painful memory is the day Thomas hid the apples. That could leave a scar on anyone. They looked at each other and smiled at the same time. It was a small moment, but not a weak one. I do not want you to leave because of Claire, Ethan said. Hannah became serious again. I would not leave because of her, or because of the town. Then why? She answered after a pause. I would leave if staying turned me into someone who existed only because you protected her. I do not want that. I do not want you defending me as if I have no hands of my own. I want to work. I want to sell something worthwhile. If people speak my name, I want them to say more than that it stood beside yours. Ethan listened carefully. Then we need to make the honey very good. Hannah looked at him. Very good. Very good, he repeated. Mabel struck one hoof against the door. And we need to hide the apples, Ethan added. That too. The night continued around them. Neither named what was growing between them love. It was too early, and perhaps the word would have made things easier than they truly were. But when Hannah returned to the shed, she felt less alone. Not safer. Not certain. Simply less alone. During the next 2 weeks, the apple honey found a name before it found complete consistency. Some customers called it the strange honey. Others called it the baker's honey. Mrs. Parker, who never wasted a complete compliment, described it as the mixture that sounds foolish until you put it on bread. It sold better than Hannah expected, not enough to rescue Sawyer Farm, but enough to draw attention. In a small town, attention could be more dangerous than failure. The first blow came as a cancelled order. The owner of a nearby inn, who had purchased ordinary honey from Ethan for years, sent his son with a short note saying they would need nothing from Sawyer Farm that month. Ethan read it once, folded it, and placed it in his pocket. Hannah sat across the shed table cutting cloth for jar covers. She did not say, "This is because of me." She did not need to. The second cancellation came 2 days later. A shopkeeper who had stocked Ethan's honey claimed he could not risk becoming involved with unusual arrangements. People are talking, he added, as though people were whether instead of a group of mouths making choices. Thomas returned with the news and dropped an empty sack beside the door. He would not even taste the new batch. Hannah continued writing figures in her notebook. Then he did not lose anything good. Thomas looked at her. That was pride. A little. Good. Pride in the right amount keeps a person from turning to dust. Ethan stood by the window. He said nothing, but Hannah saw the muscles tighten in his jaw. The following day, Mrs. Parker arrived carrying a basket and the expression of a woman who intended to interfere exactly as much as necessary. Claire Bennett has become deeply concerned about everyone else's reputation, she announced. Hannah looked up. What has she said? A great deal without finishing a single sentence. That is the talent of women who want to appear refined while muddying the water. Ethan closed the account book. Tell us plainly. Mrs. Parker crossed her arms. She says she finds it remarkable that an unknown young woman now has influence over the farm. She warns people not to confuse charity with something less respectable. And she wonders how certain recipes appear so quickly when a woman happens to find herself in a convenient household. Heat rose in Hannah's face, not shame, but controlled anger. The recipe is mine. I know, Mrs. Parker said. That is why I came here before the story reached you in an uglier form. Ethan stood. I will speak with Claire. No, Hannah said. He looked at her. She is lying. And if you run to correct her, it will look as though I need a man to clean my name every time someone throws dirt on it. I am not going to sit still. Neither am I. The firmness in her voice made Thomas raise his eyebrows from the doorway. Mrs. Parker looked at Hannah with stern approval. The girl is right about one thing. Mrs. Bennett wants a reaction. If Ethan loses his temper, she wins half the argument. And the other half? Ethan asked. Mrs. Parker pointed toward the rows of jars. You win that at the harvest fair. Sell until she has nothing left to spread except honey on her own bread. Thomas gave a short laugh. The fair was less than a week away. It was the largest trading day in the county. Families came from neighboring towns. There were farmers, merchants, musicians, children, widows, pastors, cattle buyers, curious visitors, and professional gossips. If the apple honey sold there, it might have a future. If it failed, the rumors would become a verdict. Hannah worked almost without rest. She dried apples until they were flexible but no longer damp. She measured orange peel carefully, tested the honey at different temperatures, and wrote each label in a clear hand. She wanted the jars to look modest but not poor, simple but dignified. Ethan helped without taking control. He repaired the folding table, strengthened the wagon wheel, found clean cloth, and built boxes that would keep the jars from knocking together. Thomas pretended the whole excitement over a few sweet jars was excessive, then sanded a wooden sign until the edges were smooth. Mabel complicated everything. She stole 2 apples, chewed one label, pushed her head into a cloth sack, and walked blindly across half the yard before colliding with a bucket. Hannah had to sit on the bench because she was laughing too hard to remain standing. Ethan found her holding the damaged label in one hand. We can leave Mabel here on fair day, he said. The donkey brayed from the stable. I think she just refused, Hannah replied. It is not her decision. You continue believing that. Ethan looked toward the stable, where Mabel appeared ready to organize a rebellion. Unfortunately, you may be right. The evening before the fair, Hannah worked late in the shed. The table was covered with finished jars. In candlelight, the dark amber honey seemed to hold an entire afternoon of sunshine inside the glass. She counted her personal savings. There was not much. If she left after the fair, she could pay for a few nights at a boarding house and perhaps find work in another bakery farther south. It would not be easy, but she would survive. Having a way out calmed her. Not wanting to use it frightened her. Ethan knocked softly on the open door. May I come in? Yes. He entered and saw the coins on the table. He did not ask about them, and Hannah was grateful. The wagon is ready, he said. Thomas found canvas in case it rains. Thank you. Ethan studied the jars. You have done good work. Hannah lowered her eyes. Tomorrow will tell us whether it was good enough. It is already enough to know it belongs to you. She looked up. The sentence struck the center of her fear, not fear of the fair or Claire, but fear that everything she made would remain anonymous, like her years in the bakery and her labor beneath a roof that had never admitted she belonged. If tomorrow goes badly, she said, I will leave after I help clean everything. Something in Ethan closed. Have you decided that? I have considered it. Thinking is not always deciding. No. He looked toward the yard, where Mabel made a sleepy sound. I do not want you to leave. Hannah felt pressure build in her chest. Ethan added nothing. Perhaps because he had already said more than was comfortable. Perhaps because he knew such a sentence could become a burden if tied too tightly. I do not know whether I will stay, Hannah said. But I need to know that if I do, it is not because I had nowhere else to go. Then tomorrow, sell your honey. She looked at him. It was not an order. It was faith in its roughest, plainest form. Tomorrow, I will sell my honey, she said. Ethan nodded. Outside, the farm rested. The apple trees stood beneath the cold night. The bees guarded their warmth. The wagon waited beside the stable. The jars glowed quietly in the shed. Everything was ready, or at least everything that depended on their hands. Hannah woke before the rooster on a neighboring farm. She had slept little. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the rows of jars, the handwritten labels, Claire's smile, and the eyes of Maple Hollow turning toward her like cold drops of rain. She washed with cold water, combed her hair carefully, and put on her cleanest dress. It was still simple, but she had repaired one sleeve the night before with small, strong stitches. When she looked at herself in the broken mirror beside the shed door, she did not look elegant. But she did not look defeated. That was enough. In the kitchen, she lit the fire, warmed coffee, and prepared bread with butter and a little apple pudding for the road. Her hands moved with the precision that comes when a person is afraid but refuses to give fear a place to work. Ethan entered wearing a dark vest and holding his hat. "Good morning." "Good morning." He did not tell her she looked beautiful. Hannah did not expect him to, but his eyes rested for 1 second on the repaired sleeve, her neatly gathered hair, and the apron folded over a chair. "The wagon is ready," he said. "So are the jars." Thomas appeared in the doorway. "I tied down the canvas because someone decided we should bring half the shed to town." "They are jars," Hannah said. "They are many jars." "Good. I hope fewer come home." Thomas looked at her with false seriousness. "That is the first sensible statement I have heard today." No one spoke about fear in that kitchen. Important things were rarely named before their time. They were protected inside, like warmth in a hive, until the moment came to release them. In the shed, the jars stood in neat rows beneath squares of pale cloth. Hannah touched the labels without quite touching them. Apple Honey. Sawyer Farm. Recipe by Hannah More. She had resisted putting her name there until the night before. Ethan had left Thomas's wooden sign on the table and said only, "If work has an owner, it should have a name." The first label Hannah wrote had trembled. The second was better. By the 10th, her name no longer looked like an act of defiance. Ethan loaded the boxes. Thomas secured the canvas. Hannah held the largest jar, the first batch that had turned out exactly right. It was brighter than the others and carried the richest aroma. She had planned to place it in the center of the display. "This one rides with me," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then do not let go of it." "I won't." A violent thud came from the stable. All three turned. Mabel pushed her head above the low door with her ears rigid and her determination absolute. "No," Ethan said. Mabel struck the door with one hoof.
No.
"You are not going." The donkey brayed. Thomas crossed his arms. "I warned you." "Perhaps she will stay if we give her an apple," Hannah suggested. "If we give her an apple, she will believe she won." Mabel brayed again as though victory had already been officially declared. In the end, Mabel went to the fair. They tied her behind the wagon with a lead short enough to keep her from reaching the honey boxes and long enough to make her feel important. She walked with ridiculous solemnity, as though the success of the county depended upon her attendance. The road into Maple Hollow was damp but passable. Mist lifted slowly between the trees, and pale autumn sunlight broke through the clouds. Hannah sat beside the boxes with the first jar on her lap. Halfway to town, Ethan spoke without looking at her. "If someone says something offensive, you do not have to answer." "I know." "Not because you cannot. Because not everyone deserves your voice." She studied his profile beneath the brim of his hat. "Will you also refrain from answering everyone?" "That will be more difficult." "Today?" "Yes." Thomas called from behind them. "Everything will be difficult if the donkey gets loose." Mabel brayed, insulted by the lack of trust. Hannah looked down at the jar moving gently with the wagon. "I do not want to fight," she said. "I only want to sell what I made." Ethan held the reins steadily. "Then that is what we will do." They heard the fair before they saw it. Bells, wheels, dogs, voices, musicians tuning instruments, and merchants calling to customers. The square overflowed with muted colors, smoke from cooking fires, and movement. There were stalls selling bread, cheese, wool, apples, tools, candy, seed, and cloth. Children ran between adults. Near the fountain, a young man tuned a fiddle. Two women argued over the price of eggs as though negotiating peace between nations. Hannah felt her throat tighten. Then she straightened her back. She had not come to hide the name she had written with her own hand. Ethan chose a space beside Mrs. Parker's bread stall. "Good choice," the older woman said. "If anyone says something foolish, I will hear it first." "That does not comfort me," Ethan answered. "It was not meant to." Mrs. Parker looked at Hannah and pointed toward the largest jar. "Put the prettiest one in front. People buy first with their eyes and later pretend they did not." Hannah spread a clean cloth over the table, arranged the small jars in 2 rows, and placed the large jar in the center. Beside it, she set pieces of bread for samples. Thomas hung the sign. "Apple Honey, Sawyer Farm. Recipe by Hannah More." Seeing it above the table made Hannah feel both smaller and larger. Smaller because her name looked vulnerable there, exposed to every judgment. Larger because it was no longer hidden inside a notebook or the back of someone else's kitchen. The first customers approached carefully. One woman tasted the honey and said it was sweet, as if surprised. A man complained that ordinary honey cost less. A little girl asked for a second sample until her embarrassed mother pulled her away. Mrs. Parker called from a neighboring stall, "If the child intends to eat free samples all day, at least buy bread to hold them." The mother bought a small jar. Hannah accepted the money with steady hands, though inside she barely breathed. An older man tasted the next sample and said it reminded him of the apples his late wife cooked every winter. He bought a jar. Two young women shared one spoonful, laughed when they noticed the orange, and purchased a jar together. It was not a rush. It was a beginning. Ethan stood to one side and allowed Hannah to speak. When customers asked about the bees, he answered. When they asked about the recipe, he looked toward her. She made it. Each time he said those words, the ground beneath Hannah seemed a little firmer. Mabel, tied behind the stall, behaved with remarkable dignity for almost 15 minutes. Then she discovered that children carried apples. Within an hour, she had 3 admirers, 2 enemies, and a blue ribbon tied around one ear by a child who claimed it made her look noble. Thomas regarded the donkey with disgust. Now she believes she is a merchant. Mabel brayed as though accepting the title. Near noon, the air changed. Hannah did not see Claire arrive at first. She noticed people looking toward the edge of the square. A murmur moved through the crowd in the manner that occurs when someone considered important passes among people pretending not to watch. Claire Bennett approached in a dark green dress, pale gloves, and a smile held carefully in place. 2 women from town walked beside her. They did not look like friends. They looked like witnesses. Ethan straightened. Hannah lifted a jar and adjusted it, though it needed no adjustment. Claire stopped in front of the stall. "How charming," she said. "Good morning, Claire," Ethan replied. "Good morning. Sawyer Farm has changed more than I imagined." Her gaze moved to the sign. "Recipe by Hannah Moore," she read slowly. Names appear quickly when a woman finds the right table. Hannah felt the strike but kept her back straight. The recipe required several attempts. "I am sure it did. Need can teach a person many skills." One of the women beside Claire lowered her eyes. The other pretended to inspect the jars. Mrs. Parker stopped arranging bread. Ethan shifted one step forward, but Hannah spoke first. "Would you like a sample?" Claire smiled. "I would not want to take merchandise from a farm that has already been so generous." The silence around the stall grew thicker. Some people stopped walking. Others pretended to examine nearby goods while turning their ears toward the conversation. Hannah held the tray steady. "I offer the samples equally." "How noble." Claire took a small spoonful and tasted it slowly. For one second, her expression changed. The honey pleased her. Then the smile returned. "Interesting. Although I wonder whether people are buying the honey or the story that comes with it." "I sell only honey," Hannah said. "In a small town, dear, nothing is ever sold alone. People buy what they see, what they suspect, and what they discuss afterward." The word dear sounded more insulting than an open curse. Ethan's voice was quiet. "That is enough, Claire." She turned toward him with false surprise. "Enough. We are only speaking. Surely people have the right to ask questions. A young woman appears on your farm, and suddenly there is a new recipe, a new stall, and a new name. You must understand why people are curious." Hannah felt her right hand tremble. She hid it behind the table. Claire noticed and stepped closer. "You should not be ashamed, Hannah. No one blames a woman for seeking protection. The world is hard on women who are alone. I only believe things should be called by their true names." A murmur moved through the listeners. Protection. Alone. True names. Everything had been said without being openly spoken. That was Claire's skill, staining another person without dirtying her gloves. Hannah wanted to answer. She wanted to say that she had asked for no favor she had not paid for with work, that her hands smelled of smoke and honey because they had earned her place, that Claire had no right to return in a fine dress and trample the soil she had once despised. But if Hannah answered in anger, Claire would win. If she cried, Claire would win. If she lowered her head, Claire would win. So Hannah stood still behind her jars, her name above the stall, and the whole square waiting to see whether she would break. Mabel chose that exact moment to bray loudly behind the table. The little girl who had tied the blue ribbon to her ear laughed nervously. No one else did. Ethan looked at Claire, then at Hannah. He saw her hidden hand, the careful breath, and the large jar in the center. The honey Hannah had protected as though it contained not only apples and bees, but the possibility of standing on her own feet. He did not raise his voice. There was no need. He stepped to the table and lifted the large jar with both hands, not as one lifts merchandise, but as one raises something that must be clearly seen. Hannah turned toward him. He held her gaze for one moment, as though telling her that this time he would carry part of the weight. Then he set the jar between Claire and the crowd. "This was the first batch that turned out right," he said. Claire maintained her smile. "I am pleased to hear it." Ethan did not look at her. He looked at the townspeople who had moved closer, the neighbors, the storekeeper, the women pretending not to listen, and the men who had mistaken silence for shame. "The honey came from my hives," he continued. "The apples came from my trees. But the recipe, the testing, the corrections, and the work that made it fit to sell belonged to Hannah More." Hannah felt pain in her chest, not because he was rescuing her, but because he was telling the truth when truth carried a price. When she arrived at Sawyer Farm, Ethan said, "She asked for work, not pity. Since then, she has cleaned a shed none of us wanted to enter, saved hives in floodwater, repaired sacks, cooked with food we would have thrown away, and turned fallen apples into what many of you have tasted today." Claire's smile disappeared. Ethan placed one hand flat on the table. "If anyone wants to speak about the honey, speak about its flavor. If anyone wants to speak about the recipe, use the full name written on that sign. And if anyone wants to stain a woman's work because she arrived on foot instead of in an expensive automobile, then that person is revealing nothing about Hannah, only the poverty of his own character." Silence fell with unusual force. It was not empty silence. It was the silence in which people realize they have heard something they cannot pretend to have missed. Hannah's eyes burned, but she did not cry. Not there. Not before Claire. Not before the town. Mrs. Parker moved first. She crossed from her bread stall with her coin purse in one hand and stood before Hannah's table. "How much for the large jar?" Hannah needed 1 second to understand. "That is the display jar." "I did not ask what it was. I asked the price." Ethan lowered his eyes. The decision belonged to Hannah. She looked at the jar. It was the first successful one, the jar she had protected most carefully and imagined keeping as proof. But she understood that Mrs. Parker was not only buying honey. She was taking a position in full view of the town. Hannah named a fair price. She did not lower it or apologize for it. Mrs. Parker placed the money on the table. "I will take it." Then she looked directly at Claire. "For bread. Not gossip." Someone nearby laughed softly. Then another person did. The tension loosened. Claire looked at Ethan, and for the first time since arriving, she seemed unable to find a sentence that would restore her control. "You have learned to speak in public," she said coldly.
"No," Ethan answered.
"I have learned when silence becomes cowardice." The reply was not loud, but it was exact. Claire looked at Hannah one final time. There was no admiration in her expression, but there was something she had not carried before, unwilling recognition. Hannah was not a shadow that could be erased with one elegant sentence. "I wish you success," Claire said. She turned and left. The two women followed with less confidence than they had shown upon arriving. The fair's noise returned, but it was different. A man asked for another sample. A woman bought a small jar. The mother of the child with the blue ribbon asked whether the honey could be used in baking. Hannah answered in a voice slightly rough but steady. She explained how to spread it over warm bread, stir it into milk, or add it to simple cake batter. She answered questions, accepted coins, and handed over jars. Each time she said, "Thank you." Her name on the sign felt less like a risk and more like a place. Ethan did not interfere again. He stood where he had promised to stand, not taking the center, not turning his defense into a performance, only remaining close enough if the world pressed too hard again. Thomas folded his arms and watched the trade with poorly hidden satisfaction. "I told you," he muttered when Ethan passed him. "Told me what?" "That the donkey would frighten away thieves and badly raised children." Ethan glanced toward Mabel, who was accepting another apple from the girl with the blue ribbon. Do not give her too much credit. She has already given all the credit to herself. By the end of the day, very few jars remained. Hannah's feet ached. Her fingers were sticky with honey, her throat was dry, and her head was full of voices. But the exhaustion did not feel like defeat. It was the weariness of someone who had stood before many people and had not disappeared. Mrs. Parker returned carrying the large jar beneath a cloth in her basket. "Bring me more by Tuesday," she told Hannah. "People will want it with the bread." Then she added, "Do not become lazy because of one successful day. Success cools quickly." Hannah smiled, small and genuine. "I will remember." As the stalls closed, Ethan packed the remaining jars. Hannah took down the wooden sign and traced her fingers over her name. "You did not have to do that," she said. He understood immediately. "Yes, I did. It will cost you." "I know. Some people will stop buying from you. Some already did. Because of me." Ethan closed one box and looked up. "Because of them." Hannah held the sign against her chest. The answer sounded like many he had given her before, plain, unpolished, and impossible to mistake for flattery. "Thank you. I gave you nothing that was not already yours." That sentence touched her more deeply than praise. What she had feared losing was not the stall, the money, or even the recipe. It was the right for her work to remain hers instead of becoming anonymous in someone else's hands. Mabel brayed long and impatiently, tired of human emotion. Thomas pulled gently on the lead. "Yes, yes. It was your fare too." Hannah laughed fully this time. Ethan heard her, and something in his face softened. He did not try to hide it. The fair continued around them with footsteps, music, and the golden dust of evening. But for Hannah, the world narrowed to the nearly empty boxes, the sign bearing her name, the man who had spoken when remaining silent would have been easier, and the ridiculous donkey chewing an apple as if the entire celebration had been organized in her honor. On the ride home, the sun descended beyond the rooftops. Hannah sat beside the empty boxes with the wooden sign on her lap. The large jar was gone. She did not feel she had lost it. For the first time, something she had created had gone out into the world and returned as confidence. She was no longer the guest hiding in a shed. She was not a woman collected out of pity. She was not a rumor others were free to write. She was Hannah More, and her honey had been sold beneath her own name. Back at the farm, the kitchen glowed with warm light. Hannah placed the sign on a chair beside the day's earnings. The amount was not large, but the money had a new weight. It proved that her work had not merely been noticed. It had been valued. "We sold almost everything," she said softly. "We did," Ethan answered. She looked at him. "The recipe was mine, and the honey came from your bees." He did not argue with the word "we." That quiet acceptance was another kind of partnership. Thomas entered behind them and brushed dust from his coat. "If either of you plans to discuss feelings, warn me so I can sleep in the stable." "No one is discussing feelings," Ethan said. "That is the danger. When you two do not speak, a person understands too much." Hannah laughed. Several weeks earlier, such a remark would have embarrassed her. That evening, it only made her feel included. They ate a simple meal of bread, cheese, soup, and the final piece of apple pudding. Mabel pushed her head through the doorway and demanded a share. "No," all three said at once. The donkey brayed with wounded dignity. Their laughter was not loud, but it filled the kitchen more completely than any formal celebration. In the days that followed, not everything became easy. Some people in Maple Hollow continued to gossip. One old customer never returned. A woman on the street refused to greet Hannah. Claire disappeared from the farm, but traces of her influence remained in certain conversations. Still, other things changed. Mrs. Parker began ordering honey rolls to sell beside her bread. One mother bought a jar because her daughter would not stop talking about the honey with the donkey. Thomas built a new shelf in the shed while insisting he did it only because he was tired of clutter. Ethan no longer treated every improvement as a threat. He repaired the shed roof, cleaned an old work table, and hung a lamp near the window. One evening, Hannah found the corner prepared for her. There was room for test jars, the recipe book, dried apples, labels, and clean tools. "What is this?" she asked. Ethan stood in the doorway. "A place to work." "I already work in the kitchen." "The kitchen belongs to the house. This can belong to you." The word "you" tightened something in Hannah's chest. For most of her life, everything had been borrowed. The bed, the bakery, the roof, the oven, even the feeling of belonging. She did not answer immediately. She feared her voice would be too fragile. "I do not want it to become a debt," she said. Ethan had learned the precise name of her fear. "It is not a debt." Hannah touched the table slowly. "Then it looks like a place." He lowered his eyes, as though that answer was enough. Hannah placed Mrs. Eleanor's recipe book on the new table and opened to a blank page. She wrote, "First winter at Sawyer Farm." Below it, in smaller letters, she added, "Do not sell too cheaply. Do not work as if apologizing for existing." Then she closed the notebook. Ethan placed one of the earliest apple honey jars on the shelf. Its label was crooked, the color too dark, and the texture imperfect. "This one should remain here," he said. "It is not our best." Exactly. Hannah understood. Imperfect things deserved memory because they revealed where hope had begun. The recipe book and the flawed jar stood beside each other, two ordinary objects, two pieces of evidence that a life could begin again without making much noise. "Ethan," Hannah said. "Yes." "I will stay through the winter." He did not answer immediately. He closed his eyes for one moment like a man receiving something he did not want to hold too tightly for fear of breaking it. "I am glad," he said at last. "I am not promising more. I am not asking for more." Hannah smiled with a calm she had not possessed before. "But perhaps after winter, we can discuss spring." Ethan looked at her. This time, his smile was neither brief nor hidden. Spring always brings work. He was not speaking only about work. "I know." Outside, Mabel brayed and destroyed the seriousness of the moment. Hannah pressed one hand over her mouth to keep from laughing too loudly. Ethan sighed, but his eyes remained bright. "Tomorrow we should find out what she ate." "Tomorrow," Hannah said. The word no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like an open door. Sawyer Farm was not completely healed. Neither was Ethan. Neither was Hannah. There were still difficult winters, uncertain accounts, cruel rumors, and wounds that would ache without warning. But there was a warm kitchen. There was a recipe book with blank pages. There was an imperfect jar kept as a memory. And there were two people who had not saved each other with grand promises, but with work, respect, truth, and the patience to remain close without turning affection into debt. That night, while the bees guarded their warmth and the apple trees slept beneath the cold, Hannah understood something simple. Staying no longer meant having nowhere else to go. Staying meant choosing where to begin again. In the end, this story is not only about Hannah, Ethan, or a farm that began to smell of honey and apples again. It is about every person who has reached a point in life when they no longer asked for miracles, only for a place where they did not feel like a burden. It is about people who were judged before they were heard, people who lost something important and continued working quietly with tired hands and an honest heart. Hannah did not rise because someone rescued her. She rose because she found a place where her work had a name, where her dignity was not constantly questioned, and where she could prove that a person may arrive with empty hands and still bring hope. Ethan did not heal because he forgot betrayal. He began to heal because he understood that not everyone enters our lives to destroy something. Some people arrive quietly, with respect and without dramatic promises, and eventually light a room where we had grown accustomed to darkness. Perhaps that is why this story hurts and comforts at the same time. It reminds us that no one should be reduced to a fall, a rumor, a loss, or a door that closed. Inside someone who appears defeated, there may still be a recipe, strength, tenderness, and an entire life waiting for one more chance. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. Thank you for walking with Hannah through the rain, sitting beside Ethan in his silence, and remaining until the kitchen grew warm again and a woman understood that staying was not surrender, it was choosing to start over. If this story awakened a memory, touched an old wound, or gave you even a small amount of hope, leave a comment. Every person who listens to a story leaves a small part of themselves inside it. And now I want to ask you one question. Has there ever been someone in your life who believed in you at the exact moment you had begun to doubt your own worth?